Hi, I'm Vayda, and this past Christmas, my daughter-in-law packed my suitcase and left it by the door, like I was some burden they'd finally decided to put down. They said they were helping, said the facility had great reviews. But what really shattered me wasn't the suitcase. It was realizing they'd been planning it for weeks, using my money, living in my home, calling it theirs. They changed the locks, froze me out of my own life. What kind of family does that? And why did it take me so long to see it coming? The mornings had turned sharper in Flagstaff. The cold didn't bother me much. It never had. But that particular Thursday, it felt like the air carried more than just winter. It carried silence, that kind of stillness you feel when something has shifted in the walls around you, but no one dares name it. I came downstairs to find the fireplace unlit, the mantel bare. No wreath, no garland, no tiny wooden figurines I used to place there every year since Torin was a child. The boxes of decorations were still in the attic. No one had asked me about them. More importantly, no one had mentioned Christmas dinner. Not once. There was no discussion of the menu, no back and forth about who'd make the sweet potato casserole or bring the pecan pie. At breakfast, Torin scrolled on his phone while sipping his coffee. Marjorie typed furiously on her laptop at the end of the counter, murmuring something about her holiday wellness campaign. "Big day for orders," she said, to no one in particular. I sat down quietly, placed a folded napkin in my lap, and asked gently, "Are we still doing Christmas dinner here this year?" There was a pause, a long one. Torin didn't look up. Marjorie finally answered, "We haven't made plans yet. December's been tight." Tight. That was the word she used. Not different or busy or "we'd love your help." Just tight. After they left for their day, I stayed behind and looked around the kitchen. It smelled like cinnamon and distance. The counters, once cluttered with handwritten grocery lists and sticky notes about baking times, were spotless. I reached for the drawer where I used to keep my recipes, but it had been repurposed. Now it held protein bars and shipping labels. That afternoon, I finished the scarf I'd been knitting for Marjorie. Soft lavender, her favorite shade, or at least it used to be. I wrapped it in brown paper, tied it with a string, and placed it on her side of the couch. When she came home, I waited until she had taken off her coat before I handed it to her. "Just a little something," I said. She opened it slowly, nodded, politely. "It's beautiful," she said, "but it's not really my style. I don't wear these much." She smiled like someone trained to smile for customers. The scarf found its way to the side table, where it remained untouched for the rest of the evening. Later, while clearing the kitchen, I saw a stack of outgoing mail by the door. There were cards, holiday greetings addressed to friends, neighbors, clients. One envelope sat half open. I glanced inside. A printed card, festive and generic. On the back, the sender's names: Love, Torin, Marjorie, and Dacelyn. That was all. I stood there holding the card longer than I should have. It wasn't about being left off a list. It was about what being omitted meant. I was no longer counted, not even ceremonially. That night, a notification blinked on my phone. "You've been added to the group holiday prep." The name felt sterile. I opened the chat. Dozens of messages buzzed through. Schedule changes, food photos, gift ideas. I typed a short reply. "Let me know if you need help with dessert." When I pressed send, nothing happened. Message not delivered. Read only member. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I tapped again. Still nothing. Then I looked closer. Everyone else could reply. I wasn't part of the conversation. I was only there to watch it happen. I turned off the phone and walked to my room. Outside, snow began to fall. Soft, tentative. I sat at the desk and pulled out my grocery notebook. It was habit, really. I listed ingredients like I had every December: flour, sugar, nutmeg. But halfway through, I stopped. No one had asked me to cook. No one had asked me to be part of anything. I closed the notebook and looked out the window, where the snow was now thicker, falling fast under the streetlight. I stayed like that for a while, listening to the sound of nothing. Then I asked myself something I hadn't dared to before. Did I even belong here anymore? The next morning unfolded the way they all had lately: quiet, disconnected, and cold in more ways than one. I stepped into the kitchen just as Torrin and Marjorie were finishing their breakfast. The scent of burnt toast lingered in the air, and Marjorie's mug sat half full near the sink, lipstick barely smudged on the rim. Neither of them looked up. No good morning, no offer of coffee. Their eyes stayed glued to their screens, thumbs moving with a rhythm that didn't include me. I glanced at the kitchen counter. There, in Marjorie's looping handwriting, was a list titled Holiday Prep. I skimmed the bullet points: stuffing, charcuterie, table decor, guest favors. Every item had a name beside it: hers, Torrin's, even Dacelin's. Mine was nowhere to be found. I didn't say a word, just poured my own cup of coffee and walked out as silently as I came in. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. A new group chat notification popped up. Holiday plans. The icon was a glittery wreath. My name was added, but nothing about the timing felt welcoming. I opened it anyway. Dozens of messages flew by. Guest lists, who's bringing what, a link to a spreadsheet. I typed, "Do you need help with anything? Hit send." Nothing happened. Message failed. I stared at the screen, confused, then tapped the info icon. My permissions, read only. It wasn't a glitch. It was a setting. They had given me a seat in the room, but duct taped my mouth shut. Not literally, of course, but it may as well have been. I turned off my phone and sat at my vanity. The mirror didn't lie. A woman stared back at me who used to run this entire house. A woman who managed carpools, holiday dinners, school projects, late-night stomach bugs. Now, she looked like she'd been misplaced. Not discarded, no. That would imply someone noticed. I brushed my hair, slow and steady. The kind of rhythm you fall into when you're trying to quiet something inside you. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just existed. Out of habit, I reached for the grocery pad in my drawer and began jotting down staples for Christmas: canned yams, marshmallows, green beans, 2 packs of crescent rolls. But before I could finish, a voice floated from the hallway. Marjorie, on the phone. She still thinks she's running the show. I'm just letting her write the list so she doesn't feel useless. I tore the page out, folded it neatly, and dropped it in the trash. That evening, as Torrin passed by with a glass of water, he paused at the kitchen island. "Can you Venmo me for the turkey this year?" I see. Anshe, you sige Anshe hand as is you and you were a routine errand. No mention of whether I'd be at the table. No invitation. Just the bill. "Sure," I said, and opened my app, transferring the money without hesitation, because that's what they expected. The bank account stays open even when the door closes. Around 7, I heard Marjorie in the dining room showing off a delivery to her friend on speaker. It's that limited vintage red I love, Got it just in time. I peeked into the trash can. The box it came in had my name on the receipt. I hadn't ordered it, but my account had. I walked to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, pulling my checkbook from the drawer. I scanned recent charges, writing them down one by one. My name paid for the wine. My card was used for the lights, the guest towels, even the online evites. Yet my name wasn't on the invites, not on the list, not in the chat, not even in the room. I put the pen down and looked around. The walls still bore the family photos I had framed. The tablecloth in the dining room was the same one I hemmed years ago. Everything looked familiar, but none of it felt like mine. I folded my hands over the ledger and whispered, "Am I still the mother in this house, or just the balance left in their family fund?" They said they were running errands. Marjorie, with a brisk tone, Torrin barely looking up from his phone. I watched them leave through the window, the taillights blinking red against the snow-dusted driveway. My name hadn't come up once. They took the car I helped pay for, the one we picked out together when their old one gave up. No one asked. No one said when they'd be back. With the house quiet, I did what I usually did. Folded laundry, mostly theirs. Dacelin's hoodies, Torrin's undershirts, even Marjorie's branded spa towels. I tried not to overthink it, but every wrinkle pressed felt like a reminder of how far I'd been pushed from the center of the home I once led. Time slipped by until I noticed headlights outside. They were back early. I stayed in the laundry room a moment longer, uncertain if I wanted to face them. From the hallway, I heard them shuffle past, whispering, laughing under their breath. They didn't realize I hadn't gone to bed yet. Their voices disappeared behind the office door. Click, latch, locked. I moved slowly, quietly, and stood by the door, not intending to eavesdrop, but I froze when I heard my name. "She's not just useless," Marjorie said. "She's in the way. I'm trying to build something here, and she keeps hovering, like this is still her domain." Torrin's voice followed, low but certain. "She still thinks this house belongs to her. She doesn't get it's not hers anymore. Not really. We'll make it official soon." Then they laughed, together, as if that was a punchline. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I felt like a ghost pressing my ear to a door that once opened for me without hesitation. Eventually, I walked away, quiet, careful not to let the floor creak. Back in my bedroom, everything looked the same, but didn't feel the same. My quilt, the one I'd sewn patch by patch during a hard winter, now felt like it belonged to someone else. The bookshelf by the window, the floral chair I used to read in, they all looked unfamiliar, like props in a life that no longer welcomed me. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my checkbook. It wasn't a conscious decision. My hands moved out of habit. I started listing every major expense I'd contributed since they moved in. The water heater, the new washer, groceries, utilities, the mortgage bridge when Torrin lost his job. I flipped the page and wrote a different list. What they had given back. Silence, exclusion, and now betrayal. I couldn't find the strength to cry. Something heavier sat in my chest, like disbelief mixed with exhaustion. It wasn't just what they said. It was the ease in their voices, like they'd rehearsed it, lived with it long enough for it to become truth in their minds. On my way to the kitchen to put the kettle on, I passed the scarf. The one I'd knitted for Marjorie, still on the side table, still untouched. I picked it up. The fabric felt softer than I remembered. I folded it slowly, deliberately, and carried it back to my room. I didn't return it to the gift bag. I placed it on the top shelf of my closet, not as a present, but as a placeholder, a memory of effort never asked for, never appreciated. In the quiet that followed, I sat down once more, this time not to list or tally, but to let the weight settle. I had spent years making this house a home. They spent weeks making sure I had no place in it. A few days had passed since I heard what I wasn't supposed to. Since then, nothing had been said. No acknowledgement, no shift in behavior, just the same stiff smiles, the same silence over breakfast. But I felt it in every footstep, every glance they avoided, every word they didn't speak. That morning on my way to bring in the mail, I paused at the front porch. The sun hadn't fully come up, and the air still held the sting of the night before. I glanced at the wall beside the door, instinctively looking for what had always been there. Gone. The wooden plaque with the carved letters V and J's house was no longer mounted. That sign had hung there since my husband and I moved in nearly 30 years ago. The initials stood for Vincent and me, Vayda. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Now, like everything else that once belonged to both of us, it had vanished. No one said a word, no note, no explanation, just the absence of something that mattered only to me. Later that afternoon, I walked past Torrin's office while collecting laundry and spotted a manila folder on his desk labeled Property Adjustment. The handwriting was his, neat, block letters, the way he'd written since middle school. The top page was a template for a property title transfer, partially filled in. No signatures yet, but the intention was there. I didn't touch it. I took a photo with my phone and walked out as quietly as I'd entered. That evening, as I peeled potatoes at the sink, Marjorie leaned against the doorway with that practiced softness in her voice she saved for passive suggestions. "You've seemed a little tense lately," she said, smiling as if she hadn't spent the last week erasing me in silence. "I know this time of year brings up a lot for folks your age. Sometimes it's better to start making peaceful transitions. Early planning makes everything smoother for everyone." I turned the water off, wiped my hands, and met her gaze. "This house," I said, "was never about the deed. It was about the name on the door. You removed both." She blinked. Just once. Then, without missing a beat, she said, "Well, it was a bit weather-worn." That night, as I sat down with a cup of tea, Torrin approached me in the den. He leaned on the wall like a man trying to soften a blow. "Mom," he said, "have you thought about simplifying things? Maybe putting the house under both names? It would just make things easier down the line." I didn't hesitate. "I simplified plenty when I let you move back in without rent, without condition, without asking what went wrong in the first place." He didn't argue. He only nodded, the way he used to when he wanted to retreat without losing face. After he left, I climbed into the attic. The insulation smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I opened the metal box where Vincent and I used to keep our important papers. There was the deed, my name alone, on the title. There were bank statements, insurance records, old tax returns. Everything still intact. I had never taken myself off anything because I never planned to go anywhere. Now, I knew I had to prepare for the possibility I might need to fight for what was still legally mine. That night, as I sorted documents on the bed, Daislyn peeked into my room. She looked unsure, her shoulders drawn in like she was carrying a weight she couldn't name. "Grandma," she whispered, "Mom says you're moving out soon. Is that true?" I looked up. Her eyes, so much like her father's at that age, held more understanding than he ever gave me. "Not yet," I said, but the words sat strange in my mouth. Not yet. It didn't mean never. It meant not today. And maybe tomorrow I'd be ready to prove what that really meant. If they wanted a house without my name, then they were about to see what that truly meant. The sunroom used to be mine. It was the only place in the house where the light stretched long enough to read by without squinting. It was where I kept my sewing table, the machine I'd used to hem Torrin's pants for years, and the same drawer full of mismatched buttons I'd collected since before he was born. That morning, I walked in with a basket of thread and found all of it gone, my supplies packed into a plastic bin shoved in the corner. In its place stood a rack of essential oils and bottles labeled Calm and Renew. I didn't knock on anyone's door. I didn't ask permission. I simply moved everything back. I took down the fake eucalyptus garland, slid the massage chair into the hallway, and put my machine where it belonged. Marjorie appeared in the doorway as I was rethreading a bobbin. "Did something happen to the spa setup?" she asked. I didn't turn around. "That corner saw more life before your oils ever did." She didn't reply, but her footsteps backed away faster than they arrived. Later, over breakfast, I sat at the table with my cup already poured. The silence lingered until I broke it myself. "I won't be moved around like a piece of old furniture. I built this house. I still live in it." Marjorie smiled tightly. "Of course, Vayda. No one's trying to push you out." Torrin looked between us, his mouth half open like he wanted to say something, but decided peace was more convenient than honesty. I finished my toast and excused myself, leaving the air thick with things unsaid. Back in my room, I sat down with my phone to check my bank account. Something felt off. A recent transaction stood out. Auto debit to a wellness supplier I didn't recognize. I clicked through and found more. Charges lining up with items I hadn't purchased, all routed through a credit card I didn't recall opening. That night, when everyone had gone quiet, I printed out the statements from my email. Then I pulled out a box where I kept house receipts. I compared them, item by item: lavender oils, packaging stickers, printed brochures, paid for with my funds. I stood in the hallway for a moment, stunned. Then I walked to my closet for a sweater, except it wasn't there. The next morning, I found the sweater, not in my room, not in the laundry. It was on Marjorie's Instagram page. She had posted a photo under her business account, smiling in front of a display, my sweater draped across her shoulders like it was a prop in her self-made empire. The caption read, "Grateful to my mother-in-law for supporting every step of this dream." That sweater had been a gift to myself. By evening, I had printed everything: bank statements, screenshots, the deed to the house with my name on it still intact. I called them into the living room. They sat across from me on the couch. Marjorie crossed her legs, composed. Torrin looked at his hands. I placed the papers on the table without drama. "This isn't about money. It's not about furniture or rooms. This is about respect," I said. "If I were a guest here, I'd leave, but I'm not, and you're forgetting that." Marjorie reached for a folder on the table. "We were going to talk to you about everything," she said. "You're overreacting." I leaned back in my chair. "I haven't even started reacting yet." I heard the carols before I saw the tree. The melody drifted through the hallway. one of those overproduced renditions of Joy to the World that Marjorie liked to play from her phone speakers. I followed the sound into the living room and stopped in the doorway. The tree stood tall in the corner, already half dressed. They had pulled out my old ornament box, the one I used to store in the attic each January. I recognized the fabric stars I stitched when Torin was in preschool, the beaded snowflake Dacelyn made in second grade, and a faded angel from my first Christmas with Vincent. Marjorie was holding the angel, turning it in her fingers like a trinket from a thrift store. Torin adjusted the lights, his back to me. Neither noticed me standing there. When they finally did, they both stopped moving. "You weren't home," Marjorie said, as if that explained everything. "I was upstairs," I replied, steady but quiet. They didn't ask me to join. I left the room without another word and went to put away laundry. An hour later, I passed through the front hallway and froze. There, beside the coat rack, sat a suitcase. My suitcase, neatly zipped. The tag still had the label from our last trip to Sedona. On top was a folded note. I didn't need to open it. The message was already loud and clear. Marjorie walked up behind me, too casual, too rehearsed. "We thought we'd help you get ready," she said, her voice syrupy. "The facility has great reviews. We took a tour last week. Private room, daily meals, even crafts." I looked down at the suitcase. They had packed my winter coat, a few toiletries, slippers, no family photos, no books, nothing personal, just enough to say it wasn't abandonment, just enough to make it look like a favor. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply turned and walked past her. That night, I stepped outside for air. The street was still. Snow had started to fall again, dusting the sidewalk in a quiet hush. I stayed out longer than usual, needing to breathe, needing the cold to keep me from boiling over. When I returned, the doorknob didn't turn. At first, I thought it was jammed. Then I tried again. Locked. I rang the bell. Marjorie opened the door halfway, surprise barely masking irritation. "Oh, we thought you were staying at the place early," she said, as if I'd missed a calendar invite. I didn't step inside. "My keys don't work." "Right," she nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Torin switched the locks this afternoon, just in case." I didn't argue. I walked back down the steps, pulling my coat tighter around me. 3 houses down, I rang the doorbell of my neighbor, Sharon. She and I had traded pies and small talk for over a decade, and though we hadn't spoken much recently, I knew she'd answer. She did. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Come in," she said. "You don't even have to explain." She made tea while I charged my phone. I showed her the deed on my screen, my name still listed as the sole owner. "You don't need to justify a thing," Sharon said, handing me the cup, "but you do need a lawyer." I nodded. By morning, I was back at the house. The lights were still off. No one had noticed I'd come and gone. I walked to the mailbox and slipped in an envelope, sealed, marked confidential. Inside was Greer's card, my lawyer, his number, his firm. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't knock. I just walked away. Back in Sharon's kitchen, I dialed the number. "Greer," I said when he picked up. "I'm ready now." They thought I had nowhere to go. They thought I'd be too tired to fight. They thought packing my things in silence would make me disappear. They packed my silence into that suitcase. But I came back carrying something heavier, my right to be heard. The cafe was half empty when I met Greer. We sat by the window, both holding our cups like shields. He had a manila envelope tucked under one arm, worn but sealed tight. He slid it across the table. "I've reviewed the deed," he said. "The house is yours, legally, fully." I nodded, already knowing, but needing to hear it out loud. "And the lock change?" "Illegal," he confirmed. "We'll move forward immediately." Inside the envelope was an injunction, real, notarized, and effective. By the time we stood up to leave, I wasn't the woman they thought they had quietly locked out. I was the one with papers, with facts, and finally, with leverage. We drove straight to the county clerk's office. The building smelled like old carpet and toner ink. Greer walked me through the documents as if we'd done this together 100 times. We filed everything: notice of intent, protection on the title, court-stamped restriction against, unauthorized changes. He handed me the final form. I signed without flinching. This time, my name meant something. I didn't return home with a knock. I didn't ask if it was a good time. I stepped inside the front door, my door, and the sound of laughter hit me first. The living room was set up like a boutique. Marjorie had turned my house into her business lounge. Candles burned on end tables. Women in leggings sipped from champagne flutes, and spa flyers were tucked into glass bowls like candy. Marjorie turned when she saw me, smile faltering. "Oh, we didn't expect you so soon." I walked past her, pulled the envelope from my coat pocket, and placed it gently on the table between her and her guests. "This isn't your venue," I said. "This is still my home." No raised voice, no shouting, just clarity. She blinked at the papers. "Is this really necessary?" I looked at the women seated around the room. Strangers in my home. Paying clients, likely. "Sorry for the confusion," I told them. "This property belongs to me. They'll be vacating soon." And then I turned and walked upstairs. That night, just after dinner, Torn knocked on my bedroom door. He entered without waiting. "Mom," he said, almost out of breath, "are you really doing this?" I didn't bother standing. "I waited for you to be a man, Torn. You waited for me to be invisible." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He left the room without speaking another word. By midnight, the house was quiet. I slipped downstairs in my robe and checked the garage. Stacked neatly against the wall were bins of spa inventory, labeled, sealed. There was no scene, no confrontation. They were packing. I walked to the old chalkboard where Dacelin used to write messages in crayon, and with a Sharpie, left one last note. Healing doesn't come from herbs. It comes from honesty. I wasn't waiting to be heard anymore. I had become the one who speaks last. The house smelled like cinnamon and perfume. I followed the noise into the dining room, where chairs were arranged in a semicircle, and a folding table stood in the middle, draped in white cloth and decorated with glittery pine cones. On it sat pictures of infused water and paper name tags in scripted font. Holiday brunch, hosted by Torrin and Marjorie Wells. Not the Wells family, not even the Wells home, just them. And that, more than the setup, told me exactly what I needed to know. There were a dozen women there, chatting politely over cups of cider. Marjorie flitted between them like a cruise director, all smiles and soft laughter. She hadn't noticed me yet. I walked in slowly, reached into my purse, and laid the manila envelope down on the center of the table with quiet finality. A few heads turned. I didn't raise my voice. "Before we begin," I said calmly, "thank you all for coming. I'm Vayda Wells, and this home, every inch of it, is one I built, paid for, and maintained. I know you were invited here under other names, but I'm here to clarify. This is my property. Marjorie stepped forward. Mom, not now. I held up my hand. Please, you've spoken enough this season. The envelope lay untouched, but its weight shifted the room. I passed around the documents one by one. First, a copy of the deed with my name. Then, bank printouts showing recurring charges from my retirement account, linked to purchases never authorized. Finally, a set of photos, spa merchandise, receipt timestamps, and Marjorie's posts promoting wellness events, hosted in a home she didn't own. There were no accusations, no raised voices, just proof. No one touched their cider after that. The room fell into silence, so complete you could hear the whir of the ceiling fan. A woman in the back stood up and quietly left. Another followed, murmuring something about needing to get to church early the next morning. Marjorie stood frozen, her face flushed pale. Torrin reached for her arm, a silent plea for her to stay still, say nothing, let it pass. I looked at them and said only, "Your wellness event is over. Please remove your things by tonight." I walked back to the kitchen, calm. I poured myself a fresh cup of tea, added a drop of honey, and sat at the head of the table, the same chair I'd occupied every Christmas for the past 30 years. I wore the scarf I had knitted weeks ago, the one Marjorie had dismissed as not really her style. It sat comfortably around my shoulders now, fitting somehow. Sometimes we make things for others only to find they were meant for us all along. That evening, after the guests had gone, the house quieted again. The leftover pine cones sat abandoned, the name tags crumpled beside the recycling bin. I didn't clean them up. That wasn't my job anymore. Around 10, there was a soft knock at my door. Dacelyn stepped in, her socks mismatched, her hair in a loose braid. "That was amazing, Grandma," she whispered. I looked at her for a long moment and finally smiled. That was overdue. They thought the house was theirs. I just reminded them whose name was on the foundation. The morning after the brunch, the house felt like it had exhaled. No music, no scent of lavender oils, no voices drifting from the dining room. I walked into the now empty space where Marjorie's signs had hung just the day before. The folding tables were gone, her flyers packed away. Only the faint outlines of tape remained on the walls. I checked the garage next, not expecting much, but the boxes were still there, stacked high, untouched. They hadn't left. Not yet. On the kitchen counter lay a note in Marjorie's handwriting. "We all need space right now. Let's be civil." The tone was what you'd find in a PTA email, not the kind you leave after being served legal papers. I didn't reply. I snapped a picture of it and forwarded it to Greer with the subject line, "Still plain nice." Then I opened my banking app. I went through each linked account and revoked all secondary access. I froze every line tied to my retirement. I called and had every shared card canceled, passwords reset, every automatic transfer from the last year audited. I hadn't gone this far before because I wanted to believe it was salvageable. But when you've been locked out of your own home, belief becomes a luxury. By early afternoon, I'd changed the locks again. This time, the locksmith worked quietly. No questions asked. The sound of the old hardware dropping into the bottom of a bucket felt final. I placed 2 chairs outside the door and waited. Around 5, their car pulled in. I didn't move from the window. Marjorie got out first, then Torrin. They both stopped when they saw the chairs. Torrin came up to the door and knocked. "What's this supposed to be?" he asked. I opened the door halfway. Temporary seating. Your keys don't work anymore. You changed the locks again. Marjorie's voice wavered, more shocked than angry. I'm enforcing boundaries. You taught me how. They didn't say much after that, just stood there, blinking, then turned and went back to the car. Later that evening, as I folded linens in the upstairs hall, Marjorie knocked on my door. I opened it a crack. After everything we've done for you, she said, arms crossed, voice cold. I kept my tone even. You didn't do anything for me. You did things around me, with my money, without my consent. She blinked, and for a second, I saw something behind her eyes. Fear, or maybe recognition. You have until Sunday, I said. 3 days. I expect you and your things out. She didn't answer, just turned and left. That night, I heard the muffled thump of boxes being dragged across the floor. Drawers opening and shutting, no screaming, no drama, just the quiet sound of retreat. Around 9, there was a soft knock, one I recognized immediately, Dacelyn. She slipped inside, her hoodie too big, sleeves pulled over her hands. Mom's crying in the car, she said softly. Dad's packing. I sat on the edge of the bed, patted the spot beside me. She sat down without hesitation. I just needed to see you, she whispered. I nodded. I'm here. After a long pause, she asked, Are you okay? I smiled, not because I was fine, but because I finally felt honest. I can't fix their choices, sweetheart. I'm only responsible for mine. There are many kinds of cold, but the kind you choose, that's the one that keeps you warm. The house felt larger that morning, not because anyone had left, it wasn't official yet, but because something heavy had been lifted. The tension, the rehearsed smiles, the constant sense of watching my back, it was gone. I walked through the rooms slowly. The living room still held the echo of the brunch, but the tables were folded and leaned against the wall, and the glitter Marjorie had sprinkled across the centerpiece was now just dust in the rug. On the kitchen counter, I found a lipstick-stained teacup, a crumpled receipt for lemon essential oil, and a necklace I recognized as Dacelyn's. I placed them gently into a small bowl and grabbed the broom. I didn't sweep with anger. I swept with closure. The guest bedroom was empty. Their suitcases were gone, their photos removed from the dresser. But in the corner, tucked behind the door, was the old rocker I used when Torin was a baby. They hadn't taken it. I pulled it into the sunlight near the window and sat down, not to reminisce, not to mourn, just to rest. Mid-morning, Greer called. The court finalized everything, he said. Protective order stands. Property's secure. They can't file anything to challenge it without a hearing. I exhaled deeply. It was the kind of breath I hadn't taken in years. They won't try again, he added. They know better now. I thanked him, not with words, but with silence that carried weight. Around noon, I checked the mailbox. Among the usual junk and coupons was a holiday card, red envelope, silver print. The return address was unfamiliar, but the handwriting was Torin's. Inside was a generic message, wishing you peace and joy. Signed, Torin and Marjorie. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a PR statement disguised as goodwill. I didn't hesitate. I opened the fireplace door, lit the match, and dropped the card in. Some things don't need to be shredded. They just need to be let go. That evening, I set the table. 2 plates, not 3. A candle burned at the center, not for grief, but for transition. I made roasted chicken and green beans. No extravagance, just enough for myself and one other. When Daslin arrived, her arms were full. Cookies, a scarf, a small plant in a chipped ceramic pot. I brought a little bit of everything, she said, stepping out of the cold. I kept your chair, I replied, guiding her to the table. We ate in comfortable quiet, occasionally laughing at stories that didn't require defense or caution. She didn't ask about her parents. I didn't offer anything. That kind of silence wasn't heavy. It was mutual respect. After dinner, we moved to the couch. She pulled a blanket over her lap and dozed off during a Hallmark movie rerun. I sat beside her and watched the lights on the tree blink in no particular rhythm. They had taken what they wanted when they moved in. They thought they'd shape this house into their future. But in trying to replace me, they'd only made space for me to return to myself. They left behind more than boxes. They left behind the space for me to be whole again. The envelope was cream-colored, with no return address. My name was written in Marjorie's careful script, the kind she used for Christmas cards and spa thank-you notes. It arrived a few days after New Year's, tucked between utility bills and a seed catalog I hadn't subscribed to. I stood by the kitchen counter holding it longer than I should have. Eventually, I opened it. Inside was a letter. Not an apology. Not really. More like a justification wrapped in soft language. We didn't mean for it to go that far, she wrote. You misunderstood our intent. Things got out of hand. No ownership, just deflection. I didn't tear it up. I didn't throw it in the trash. I walked it to the back bedroom, opened the top drawer of an old file cabinet, and tucked it between expired coupons and tax documents from over a decade ago. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because some things don't need reacting to. They just need to stop taking up space in your front room. The next day, as the sun began to dip behind the pines, I heard a knock on the door. A single knock, familiar in its hesitation. I opened it to find Torrin standing there alone. Hey, Mom. He looked older. Not from age, but from all the weight he had carried and dropped without ever realizing who picked it up. You got a minute? I have a porch, I said, not opening the door wider. It's still mine. We sat on the steps, neither of us speaking for a while. He rubbed his hands together like he had something to say, but didn't know how to make it land. I didn't know how much you held it all together. He said finally, You still don't. He nodded once, looked at his shoes. There was no defense, no deflection this time, just silence. He asked after a few more minutes, Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I thought about it longer than he probably wanted. I'm not holding anger anymore, I said, but I'm also not holding space. It wasn't cruel. It was honest. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind that drew lines without drawing blood. He left without asking to come inside. In the weeks that followed, Daslin came more often. She helped me sort through books, trimming back the garden that had gone wild at the edges. We didn't talk much about the past, not because we were avoiding it, but because it had stopped being the loudest thing in the room. One afternoon, while labeling a box of old VHS tapes for donation, she looked up and said, It feels better here now. I nodded. We talk less about what happened, I said, and more about what we're planting next. That night, I lay in bed with the window cracked. The air was cold, but not biting, the kind of cold that asked to be noticed, not feared. I stared up at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly, rhythmically. The house didn't feel empty. It felt uncluttered. I used to think resolution came from apologies, from closure, from people saying the right thing at the right time. But maybe resolution isn't something handed to you. Maybe it's what you build when you stop waiting for the words that never came. Some doors stay closed, but the light still gets in through the windows. New Year's Eve arrived with more quiet than celebration. No confetti, no clinking glasses, no resolutions scribbled on notepads. Just me, this house, and a candle I lit on the coffee table. One flame, steady, familiar. I sat in the old chair by the window, once Vincent's, then avoided, then reclaimed. I dusted it, repaired its left arm, and finally pulled it out of the corner like a friend returned from exile. It fit me now, not because I had shrunk, but because I had grown into the kind of stillness that didn't need to explain itself. Upstairs, in my room, I opened a drawer and pulled out a piece of stationery, not the kind with flowers or borders, just plain, cream-colored paper. I uncapped a pen and wrote, "Dear Torrin and Marjorie," and paused. The rest came easily. I've learned more from your absence than I ever did from your presence. You taught me what love without respect feels like. Thank you for showing me how to stop accepting it. I didn't sign it. I didn't seal it. I folded the paper and placed it in a box beneath the bed, not to mail, just to move it out of my hands. Later that afternoon, Daislyn arrived. She carried cocoa in a thermos and a worn board game we used to play when she was 9. Her presence didn't feel like company. It felt like rhythm, the kind you don't notice until it's gone and then returns like a heartbeat. She curled up on the rug in front of the fireplace, set up the game board, and smiled. "You feel more like you again," she said. I didn't answer right away. I just looked around the living room. The air felt different, not lighter, firmer, more mine. "It feels like home again," I said aloud, and it didn't sting. That night, after she left, I opened the hall closet and pulled out a box I'd labeled in marker. Not me anymore. Inside were scarves I'd knitted for holidays no one celebrated with me. Books I no longer felt obligated to keep. Pictures that reminded me of versions of myself I'd long since outgrown. I placed the box by the door for donation. Some things were never meant to come back. As the evening wore on, I turned on the radio. Soft jazz played at first. Then, as if the station knew what memory was needed, it shifted to an old Christmas song, the same one that played the day we brought Torrin home from the hospital. I remembered the way I held him then, full of hope, of plans. I didn't cry. I smiled, not with regret, but with a quiet goodbye. Just before midnight, I cracked the living room window. The cold air brushed across my cheeks, grounding me. No fireworks, no countdown, just a clean, clear inhale. Some things I'll never get back, but I never needed to. I just needed to stop holding space for people who never intended to return it. I kept the house, not for them, not for the past, but for the woman I became inside it. If there's one truth I've learned from everything I've lived through, it's this: keeping peace should never mean giving up your place. You can love deeply and still set boundaries. You can forgive without reopening the door. Sometimes strength looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like saying no more and meaning it. So I ask you, have you ever given too much room in your life to someone who only ever took? And what did it cost you? If this story moved you or made you reflect on something in your own life, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a 1 in the comments if it touched your heart, or share where you're watching from. If you didn't connect with it, Tell me why. Your voice matters too. And if you'd like more stories like this, real and raw, told from the heart, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these voices alive.